He helped create the sound that a whole generation loved, but he was never the one standing in front. While others grabbed the spotlight, he built the heart of the music from behind the scenes. From quiet recording studios to huge concert stages, Benny Andersson lived through the beginning, the falling apart, and the comeback of one of pop music's most famous bands. But the story he's finally telling now isn't about shiny disco balls or sparkly costumes. It's about being tired, feeling sorry, broken relationships, and the painful quiet that came after all the cheering stopped. After people wondered for decades, Benny has finally talked, and what he said is deeper, sadder, and more honest than anyone thought it would be. Building a kingdom of sound. Before the world ever danced to the beat of Dancing Queen or cried to the sadness of The Winner Takes It All, Benny Andersson was already busy creating the invisible foundation of what would become one of pop music's longest-lasting achievements. Born on December 16, 1946 in the Vasan neighborhood of Stockholm, Benny grew up in a working-class family where music wasn't something you did for a job, but something special everyone loved. His father, who worked as a civil engineer, and his grandfather, who taught himself music, gave Benny an accordion when he was just 6 years old. That simple instrument would open up a love for melody and harmony that would stay with him forever. Unlike many other kids his age who wanted to be famous, Benny wasn't driven by wanting people to look at him. He was more interested in figuring out how music actually worked. From the math-like patterns of Bach to the down-to-earth stories in Swedish folk songs, he taught himself piano just by listening and could copy melodies after hearing them only once or twice. By the time he was 10, he was already playing for family get-togethers and school shows. People knew him not for putting on a show, but for his natural ability to understand feeling and emotion in music. In 1964, when he was just 18, Benny joined the Heap Stars, a Swedish rock band that people called the Swedish Beatles. As soon as he joined, their sound got way better almost right away. The group started reaching #1 on the Swedish music charts with hits like Sunny Girl and Wedding, songs that Benny wrote himself. These early wins not only showed he could write songs people would remember, but also helped him get really good at arranging music in the studio and performing live. He quickly became known as the band's musical genius while also quietly learning about the business and technical parts of the music industry. Then came an important night in 1966. Benny met Bernos while they were both playing music at a friend's party. Bern, who was in the folk pop group the Hoot Nanny Singers, loved harmony, arrangement, and details just like Benny did. Their jam session that night started an instant musical friendship. Over the next few years, they started writing together, trying out different styles and structures, and even creating songs for other Swedish musicians. Their working relationship grew strong, not just because they respected each other, but because they balanced each other perfectly. Benny, the emotional songwriter, Bern the clever lyric writer. By the early 1970s, Benny and Bern weren't only partners in writing music, but also in life with two other musicians, Agnia Feltskog, a chart-topping Swedish solo singer, and Annie Fred Frida Lingstad, a jazz-turned-pop singer with a powerful deep voice. Their joint musical project started under the long name Bern and Benny, Agnetha, and Annie Frid. The name was awkward, but the chemistry was amazing. They tried and didn't win the Swedish contest for Eurovision in 1973. Not giving up, they came back the next year with Waterloo, a glam pop song that won the 1974 Eurovision Song Contest and immediately made them international stars. Shortly after, they picked a name that was easier to remember, ABBA, using the first letters of their first names. From that moment on, Benny was no longer just a pop musician. He was someone who designed sound. He treated each song like a painting, adding layers of instruments, arranging vocal harmonies perfectly, and trying out synthesizers way before it was cool. In the studio, people knew him for his patience and wanting everything perfect, sometimes spending days redoing a single harmony until it felt emotionally right. He wasn't interested in what was popular. He was interested in what would last forever. Even as Agnia and Frida amazed crowds in matching jumpsuits, and Bern wrote smart, bittersweet words, it was Benny who shaped the emotional feeling underneath ABBA's music. His special style mixed brightness with depth, a Swedish sadness hidden inside catchy melodies. Songs like Knowing Me, Knowing You and Fernando had this double meaning. Happiness on the outside, sadness underneath. That was Benny's gift, not just to pop music, but to generations of people who felt something deeper in ABBA's songs that seemed simple on the surface. In truth, Benny Andersson wasn't just making songs. He was building a kingdom, one where every chord, every silence, every note was important. And while the spotlight often shined somewhere else, the structure of ABBA's sound was clearly his. Falling apart while climbing higher. For most of the 1970s, ABBA rode an unstoppable wave of fame. But as the band got more successful in public, it started breaking down in private. The falling apart wasn't sudden. It was subtle, slow, like a house getting worn down by time rather than destroyed by fire. The first crack came in 1979 when Byrne and Agnetha got divorced. It was a very personal breakup, but one that the band tried to get through professionally. At the time, the group was working on their album Super Trooper, and though the songs still had their signature polish, the recording sessions started to feel heavy and different. 2 years later, Benny and Frida went down the same path. Their relationship had once been described as fiery and symbiotic. A true musical love story. They met in 1969, long before ABBA, and built a connection through sound before anything else. Frida once said in a 1975 interview that Benny understood her in a way no one else did. But understanding each other in the studio didn't always work in real life. Benny's obsessive perfectionism, which made him brilliant in the studio, left very little room for being emotionally there at home. Frida, who was expressive and emotional, felt him becoming more and more absent. By 1981, Benny admitted to having fallen in love with Mona Nerklet, a television producer he met during a TV special. He told Frida the truth, but the damage was already done. The split was quiet, professional even, but it left a deep scar on the band's relationships. The next and final studio album, The Visitors, released that same year, showed the emotional coldness that was setting in. Songs like When All Is Said and Done and Slipping Through My Fingers were filled with unspoken pain. The sparkle was fading, and though the band would keep going for another year, something important had already disappeared, confirming the silence we all felt. For over 40 years, the story of ABBA's end was defined not by explosive headlines, but by a deafening silence. Unlike most legendary bands that end with a farewell tour, a breakup press conference, or some final meaningful performance, ABBA simply vanished. Their last official single, Under Attack, was released in December 1982. It didn't make the impact of their earlier hits. There was no follow-up album, no world tour, no final bow, just a gradual fade into the fog of wondering and fan theories that would last for decades. Their absence left an empty space, and into that space came endless questions. Why did they stop when they were still so successful? Did money tear them apart? Was it personal drama, creative fighting? 4 years, none of the band members gave a clear answer. Interviews stayed vague. The word hiatus floated around, and their public appearances became rare and carefully polite. In many ways, ABBA became a myth frozen in time. The perfect pop group that simply stopped existing without explanation. That changed in November 2024. Benny Andersson, known for a long time for his quiet thinking and avoiding personal publicity, sat down for an interview with The Guardian. He didn't arrive with a rehearsed story. There was no publicist-written statement or prettied-up PR spin. Instead, Benny did something rare. He told the truth plainly. "We were exhausted," he admitted. Marriages were falling apart. The music was starting to sound unnatural. We needed to stop to preserve ourselves. That simple, no-nonsense statement hit harder than any scandal ever could. In just a few words, Benny confirmed what many longtime fans had always suspected. The breakup hadn't come from betrayal or fighting about art. It had come from emotional exhaustion. After years of performing, recording, and keeping up the appearance of joy while their personal lives collapsed behind the scenes, the group was drained. Not dramatically, quietly, completely. Then, in April 2025, Benny gave a follow-up interview to Billboard, sharing even deeper details. He described the band's final 2 years, 1981 and 1982, as uninspired workdays. What had once been exciting collaboration had turned into routine. He and Byrne were still writing, but without the same energy or purpose. The songs came more slowly. The studio sessions were shorter. Everything had started to feel like a job, not a passion. Even more telling was how Benny explained the group's decision to stop. He didn't call it a failure. He didn't make it sound romantic. He described it as something that had to happen eventually. It wasn't sustainable anymore. He said we couldn't go on pretending, not to each other, not to ourselves. This admission wasn't just eye-opening. It was healing. For decades, fans had heard that final ABBA albums like The Visitors felt different, more thoughtful, more sad. Songs like One of Us, like an angel passing through my room, and The Day Before You Came didn't just sound sad. They were sad. There was a heaviness in the words and music that showed something deeper than pop trends. Listeners felt it, even if they couldn't put it into words. Benny's confession validated that feeling. The hurt, the sense of something falling apart beneath the polished surface, wasn't just imagination. It was real. What's striking is that none of Benny's revelations carried bitterness. He didn't place blame on Byrne, Agnetha, or Frida. Instead, he spoke of the band's end like a natural conclusion, like a beautiful machine that had run its course. We had done what we could do, he said. There was nothing left in us to give it honestly. For fans, it was the closure they never knew they needed. The mystery was no longer mysterious. The silence had a reason. And most importantly, the pain that had echoed through ABBA's final songs now had a name. Exhaustion, emotional collapse, and the quiet necessity of walking away. Frida's path through grief and royalty. After ABBA's quiet ending, Frida went on a journey no one quite expected. In 1992, she married Prince Heinrich Russo-Royce of Plauen, becoming a member of European royalty. The Swedish press went into a frenzy. How could the same woman who once ruled disco floors now be living in a Swiss castle, going to galas and banquets? But life as a princess wasn't the fairy tale it appeared to be. Frida struggled with the strictness of aristocratic expectations. The spontaneity and emotion that defined her as a performer didn't fit into the structured world of royalty. And then came the deepest heartbreak of her life. In 1998, her daughter and Lisa L. died in a car accident in New York. She was just 30 years old. The loss was devastating. The woman who once sang to millions now wanted silence, heartbroken in her secluded home near Lake Geneva. The glitz of royalty, the fame of her past. It all became pale in comparison to the emptiness left by her daughter's absence. And yet it was Benny who reappeared during that time. Despite everything, he reached out. They shared a past no one else could understand. And in their quiet reconnection, there was comfort. Not in reliving the glory days, but in the understanding that only two people who had seen everything fall apart could truly share. Frida, who once needed the spotlight to feel seen, had now found peace in simply being remembered, not by the world, but by someone who had known her before it all. Returning without regret. In 2018, after decades apart, the unthinkable happened. ABBA reunited to record 2 new songs. The announcement stunned the music world. Not just because it ended a 36-year silence, but because it marked the beginning of one of the most ambitious projects in music history, ABBA Voyage. By 2021, Benny and Byrne had written a full-length studio album under the same name, and Benny had taken total control of production. But more than the music, it was the performance model that changed everything. ABBA Voyage wasn't a traditional concert. It was a digital experience. Using motion capture and avatar technology, Benny and the team recreated the band's 1979 selves, performing live with a 10-piece band at a purpose-built arena in London. The show was an astonishing success. Since opening in May 2022, it has sold over 1.3 million tickets, attracting fans from more than 140 countries. The digital avatars didn't just copy, they went beyond what people expected. Benny, always the craftsman, oversaw even the smallest sound design details, insisting that the performance be authentic, emotionally precise, and technically perfect. And perhaps most remarkably, the band turned down a $1 billion offer for a live tour. They didn't want to chase the old high. Instead, they redefined performance on their terms. The avatars, like Benny himself, didn't need to be seen to be felt. The music spoke for them as it always had.